the Sunday morning sermon is actually a really bad way to deal with something like politics. I guarantee you, if you go up on Sunday morning in most congregations and you try to preach the one sermon on politics that you haven't been preaching on for a long time, your Monday morning inbox is going to be an ugly scene. And that's honestly why most pastors, or many pastors, don't preach on politics on Sunday morning, because they instinctively know my Monday morning inbox is going to look awful if I do that.
I want to go to Dr. John G. West. He's the vice president of the Discovery Institute, author of Stockholm Syndrome Christianity, Why America's Christian Leaders Are Failing and What We Can Do About It. Dr. West, thanks for being here.
Mike,
I don't even know who that was, but does that guy have a good point? What are the reasons why pastors do not engage in politics like maybe they should?
Yeah, well, actually, I think he does have a legitimate point. I think the pastors should be preaching the gospel first and foremost. The issue is that the gospel does have social consequences. And so while I think it can be a problem for pastors to be focusing, especially on partisan politics, if partisan politics is coming for you, either in the area of religious liberty or trying to promote a culture of death or trying to actually force the culture into ways that are sort of anti-biblical, then I think pastors and other Christians really don't have a choice. They have an obligation to speak up.
Shouldn't play devil's advocate? The pastor's job is to preach the gospel. That's it. Don't touch on these other issues. It's too political, too controversial. You're going to offend somebody, and it's not worth going there. Just focus on your heavenly-minded worldview, and that's it. What do you say to that?
Well, yeah, well, again, I have great sympathy for that, and I do think that the number one thing is for pastors to preach the gospel. But of course, Christians aren't just pastors. They're Christians in every walk of life. And so overall, we are called to be salt and light. And so there are some things, great questions of national morality, things where the Bible is clear about how we ought to act and how society ought to act. And if politics is, for example, during the COVID era, you had governments shutting down churches for months on end when they were not shutting down other things. So in Nevada, a devout church-going governor shut down churches with onerous restrictions. At the same time, he largely opened up casinos. Now, unfortunately, most churches went along with that, and they didn't speak out. The few churches that did speak out and try to counteract that government restrictions on churches actually worshiping were few and far between. And so then you get more of that. And so I think especially in the area of religious liberty, that's one case where churches and pastors do need to speak up, or else they're not going to have the right to meet.
Yeah. So our time is limited here, and I'm assuming if you've made it this far into the special, you probably agree with us. So I'll skip over the question of how America's Christian leaders are failing into why you think they are. What is the motivation behind their lack of courage, I'll call it?
Yeah, I think there are different things, but I think three big things stand up. Number one, a lot of Christians get their information not from your show, but from the same sources that the secular elites do, whether it be the New York Times, Washington Post, or Google searches or Wikipedia. All these places are heavily biased against Orthodox Christianity, against a lot of good things. But I know a lot of my Christian friends, when I was a Christian college professor, a lot of my colleagues, they got the information from the same bad sources. Garbage in, garbage out. That's going to influence you. Number two, a lot of Christians seek to please the wrong people. And so they look up to, it's not just that they listen to, but they want to please the secular culture. And so then finally, I think in a lot of our Christian institutions, churches, Christian schools, Christian universities, that the people in charge, the board members, the people called by God to actually keep their institutions faithful to their mission, often are just capitulating. And they themselves may be personally biblically faithful, but they're not willing to hold that standard to their pastors or to their Christian schools, for example.
Okay. Let's say someone does that latter point and it offends, there's a member of the church who's a Democrat and they love this Democrat and they're pro-choice or whatever. The thing is, our pastor's going to get up there, have a conviction, and we're going to offend this person, and that's going to affect their walk they're perhaps becoming a Christian one day or something like that. Why get involved in that case if it's going to affect this person following Jesus?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And again, I think that pastors are not experts in everything. And I actually don't think that pastors should be involved in every detail of public policy where there can be legitimate disagreements among Christians. But abortion is a great example. I mean, the Bible talks about God creates us in the womb, knows from the very beginning who we are. It talks about in Psalm 139. Christians from the earliest years of the church stood against abortion and infanticide in the Roman Empire. So this is not controversial Christian teaching. So if you are in a society where that is being pushed and advocated, that's a moral issue. And the fact that there may be people in your congregation who don't realize that this is an issue of discipleship, that you are misleading them. They're not going to have a great walk with Jesus if they turn around and have an abortion or promote abortion with their kids or help facilitate other people having abortion, let alone infanticide. So you're not helping them walk with Christ. You're actually being an obstacle by not telling them the truth.
I want to talk about marriage for a minute because I see the transgenderism thing that happened. And you kind of walk back, right? You walk back from transgenderism, like what is a man or a woman? And then you go back one, it's homosexuality. And then you go before that. And I remember in the beginning of the whole gay marriage argument, there was a lot of, well, you Christians get divorced too all the time. Like, what's the difference? Like, you're right. So what is their marriage that you hold so sacred? You guys aren't exactly living up to anything special either. How far back do you go before you start to see the failings of church in culture that you think kind of started this downward spiral?
Yeah, Mike, thank you for so much raising that. In my chapter on sexuality, I do that because a lot of people who are so concerned about transgenderism, which I think they should be, you have to realize where did it start. And I do think, the church in America, unfortunately, sadly, largely gave up on biblically faithful marriage for heterosexuals. And with the divorce culture, there are some biblical grounds for divorce, but divorce is a tragedy, and certainly we should work against it. And a lot of churches really just didn't do much. And I give the experience in the church that I was involved in that was usually biblically faithful, but when it came to us addressing divorce, people were really skittish because, of course, a lot of people are divorced. And I want to say, everyone can be forgiven, so it's not about that. But if you don't uphold the standards or help people understand why faithful marriage is important and marriage is permanent, you're going to get the opposite. And so, the church, that was really the first step. Once you're giving up on that sex is made for biblically faithful marriage, then you get what we have today.
We've got about a minute or so. It's a big question, but what would an awakening look like in America? Like if we had another great awakening, like John Edwards style awakening, what would that look like? Or why do we even need something like that?
Well, I think we just need to look around our society and realize why we need it. All things are breaking down, including our family structures, including crime, all sorts of things. Now, what would it look like? I think it would look like there would be a return. More people would go to churches, but also what's happening in the churches would be genuine discipleship on these things that would be countercultural, because we have a lot of things in our society that are really bad. It would be where Christians and their kids wouldn't be getting the same information. They wouldn't be letting their kids be raised by social media or by TikTok. And they'd be raised actually again by their parents and by their fellow peers in the church. And so we've had those things in the past. I write about some of them in my book, The Second Great Awakening, which was really, if people don't know about it, they should read my book because it was a huge transformation in America from a time when many people were falling away from the faith. And so good things can happen.
I saw a bumper sticker the other day. It said, "I homeschool because I've seen the village and I don't want it raising my child." Thought you'd appreciate that. Dr. John G. West, the book is Stockholm Syndrome Christianity, Why America's Christian Leaders Are Failing and What We Can Do About It. And please go check out the Discovery Institute, which Dr. West is the vice president of. Dr. West, I hope we can talk again soon, sir. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mike.